The day my uncle sold Grandpa's company, everyone congratulated him. Employees applauded. Investors shook his hand. Even the local newspaper called him the man who saved the family business. I was the only person who wasn't smiling. Not because I wanted the company, not because I wanted the money, because Grandpa had made me one promise, just 3 days before he died. He held my hand, looked me straight in the eyes, and quietly said, "No matter what anyone tells you, don't let them sell the business." At the time, I thought grief had confused him. After all, my grandfather had built Carter Woodworks from a tiny one-room workshop into one of the most respected custom furniture companies in the state. He had spent 52 years building it. My Uncle Michael had worked there for over 20 years. Everyone expected him to become the owner. Even I did. So when Grandpa passed away, I didn't question anything until the sale happened. 3 months later, the company was gone, sold to a national corporation. The family celebrated. My uncle bought a lakefront house, a brand new luxury SUV, and somehow, within weeks, he paid off every debt he had accumulated over the previous decade. Everyone called him successful. I called it strange. Because Grandpa hated debt, he hated shortcuts, and more than anything, he hated selling to corporations. He used to say, "A business isn't just machines and buildings. It's the people who trusted you enough to build it with you." He would never have wanted strangers taking over, never. Yet somehow, everyone insisted the sale had been his final wish. Even the attorney repeated it. Your grandfather wanted Michael to handle everything. So, I tried to move on. Until one rainy Thursday afternoon, I received a package with no return address. Inside was an old leather notebook. The cover was cracked. The corners were worn. Across the front, Grandpa had written 3 simple words. Business ledger no. 7. Confused, I opened it. The first pages contained handwritten notes, supplier payments, employee bonuses, equipment purchases, nothing unusual. Then, near the middle, a folded piece of paper slipped onto my kitchen table. It wasn't part of the ledger. It had been hidden inside. Across the front, in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting, were 7 words. Open only if Michael sells the company. My heart stopped. I stared at the envelope for nearly a minute, because there was only one reason Grandpa would write something like that. He had expected this to happen. With shaking hands, I broke the seal. Inside, there was only one handwritten sentence. If you're reading this, Michael ignored my final instructions. Beneath it, a business card. Richard Lawson, attorney at law. The same attorney who had handled Grandpa's estate. On the back of the card, Grandpa had written another message. Ask Richard about the original ownership ledger. I frowned. Original ownership ledger? I had never heard those words before. Not once. I immediately picked up my phone. Richard answered on the second ring. Before I could even introduce myself, he quietly said, "I've been wondering when you'd call." A chill ran through my body. "You knew about this?" There was a long silence. Then Richard answered, "I've been waiting almost 4 years for someone to find ledger number 7. My pulse quickened. "What is the original ownership ledger?" He took a slow breath. "It isn't just a ledger. It's the one document your grandfather believed could save his company. After he was gone." I looked down at the notebook in my hands. "What do you mean?" Richard's voice became unusually serious. "Don't tell anyone you found it. Not your uncle. Not your family. Not even the former employees. Come to my office. And bring the ledger." I swallowed hard. "Why?" His answer sent a shiver down my spine. "Because if Michael knows you have it, he'll do everything he can to get it back." I didn't sleep that night. The old leather ledger sat on my kitchen table. Every time I looked at it, I heard Grandpa's voice again. Don't let them sell the business. At the time, I thought he was talking about memories. Now, I wasn't so sure. Before sunrise, I left my apartment. I wrapped the ledger inside an old canvas backpack. No briefcase, no fancy folder, just an ordinary bag no one would notice. Richard's warning echoed in my mind. If Michael knows you have it, he'll do everything he can to get it back. That wasn't something an attorney said lightly. Richard's office looked exactly as I remembered. The same oak bookshelves, the same antique clock, the same photograph of Grandpa standing beside the first delivery truck Carter Woodworks had ever owned. Richard smiled as I entered. You brought it. I placed the backpack on his desk. For several seconds, neither of us touched it. Finally, Richard carefully removed the ledger. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he gently brushed a thin layer of dust from the leather cover. I haven't held this in 15 years. You knew Grandpa hid it? I helped him. He answered quietly. I frowned. You helped him hide it? Richard nodded. The day he finished this ledger, he asked me a strange question. What was it? He asked, Richard, if someone ever tries to steal 30 years of honest work, can one notebook stop them? Richard smiled sadly. I told him, only if someone honest finds it first. He slowly opened the cover. The first pages looked ordinary. Monthly sales, employee payroll, supplier invoices, equipment purchases, nothing unusual. Then Richard stopped at page 43. There. I leaned closer. At the bottom of the page, Grandpa had written one sentence in red ink. Never separate ownership from stewardship. What does that mean? Richard looked at me. It means Harold never believed ownership was just about having your name on legal documents. He believed ownership carried responsibility. I nodded. That sounds like Grandpa. It gets more interesting. Richard carefully turned another page. Hidden between two sheets was an extremely thin piece of carbon paper. He lifted it gently. Underneath, writing appeared that hadn't been visible before. A second ledger. Secret notes, dates, names, percentages. I stared in disbelief. There are two sets of records. Richard smiled. Exactly. The first ledger showed what the accountants saw. The hidden ledger showed what Grandpa knew. Every major business decision, every private agreement, every promise made with a handshake. Everything Grandpa considered too important to trust to memory. Then one page caught my attention. The heading read, Founding Agreement. Date, 34 years earlier. Grandpa's signature. Another signature. One I didn't recognize. Who is Daniel Brooks? I asked. Richard looked surprised. You've never heard that name? I shook my head. No. He was your grandfather's original business partner. I blinked. Grandpa had a partner? For almost 12 years. I thought Grandpa built Carter Woodworks alone. So did almost everyone, Richard answered. But Daniel died unexpectedly. And his family moved away. I looked back at the ledger. So why does this matter now? Richard slowly turned the page. Because beneath Daniel's signature was one handwritten clause. A clause never included in the company's official records. It read, if either founder dies, no sale of Carter Woodworks may occur without written approval from both founding families. I looked up. What? Richard nodded. Exactly. I read it again, slowly, trying to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. No sale. Without approval from both founding families. But my uncle sold the company. Richard folded his hands. That's why Harold never wanted this ledger destroyed. I felt my heart pounding. Does that mean the sale wasn't valid? Richard chose his words carefully. It means there may be questions no one asked before the sale. He opened another folder from his filing cabinet. Inside was the purchase agreement, the document Michael had signed. Richard pointed to one section. Seller authority. Signed by Michael Carter, sole authorized representative. Richard quietly slid the hidden ledger beside it. Do you notice the problem? I looked back and forth. Then it hit me. Michael had claimed he had complete authority, but according to Grandpa's private agreement, he didn't. I whispered, then why didn't anyone stop the sale? Richard sighed. Because no one knew this agreement existed. The official corporate records never included it. Only Harold's original ledger. So Grandpa hid the only copy? Richard nodded. He feared someone would destroy it. My phone suddenly vibrated. The screen displayed one name, Uncle Michael. Richard looked at the caller ID, then slowly looked at me. Has he called you today? No. This is the first time. Michael called again, then again. 3 calls in less than a minute. A text message appeared. Where are you? Another. We need to talk. Another. It's about Grandpa's ledger. My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone. Richard hadn't told anyone. So how did Michael know I'd found it? Before either of us could answer that question, Richard's receptionist hurried into the office. Mr. Lawson. She looked nervous. There's someone downstairs asking for you. Who? She hesitated, then quietly replied, It's the CEO of the company that bought Carter Woodworks. Richard frowned. He wasn't invited. She nodded. I know. He says, he's here because someone finally found ledger number 7. The room fell completely silent, because that meant one thing. Someone besides Grandpa had known the ledger still existed, and now they wanted it. Richard looked at his receptionist. Don't send him in yet. She nodded and quietly closed the door. The office fell silent. I looked at Richard. Why would the CEO know about ledger number 7? Richard slowly leaned back in his chair. Because I believe the company discovered something after they bought Carter Woodworks. What? They realized they hadn't purchased everything they thought they had. He carefully closed the ledger. Listen to me. From this moment on, this notebook never leaves your sight. Not even for a minute. I nodded. What if they ask to see it? They will. And the answer is no. A soft knock came from the door. Richard stood. Send him in. The man who entered looked to be in his late 50s, gray hair, tailored navy suit, calm eyes. Nothing about him seemed threatening. He extended his hand. I'm Thomas Bennett, Chief Executive Officer of Northbridge Industries, the company that had purchased Grandpa's business. I shook his hand carefully. He glanced at the leather ledger resting on Richard's desk. For the first time, his confident expression faded. So, it really exists. Richard remained standing. What brings you here, Thomas? Thomas sighed. I came because I owe both of you an apology. I frowned. An apology? He nodded. My company bought Carter Woodworks believing the sale was legitimate. We completed every legal review available to us. We believed Michael Carter had full authority. Richard crossed his arms. And now? Thomas looked directly at the ledger. Now I'm not so sure. He opened a slim folder. Inside was a copy of the purchase agreement. We discovered several inconsistencies during post-acquisition. He slid a page across the desk. Your grandfather's signature appears nowhere in the final authorization package. Richard wasn't surprised. It shouldn't. Harold was already gone. Thomas nodded. Exactly. But something else bothered us. He turned another page. The company bylaws referenced founders' restrictions. We searched every corporate file. They were missing. I looked at Richard. The restrictions were in the hidden ledger. He nodded. And nowhere else. Thomas continued. If those restrictions are genuine, the entire transaction may have been incomplete. Before anyone spoke again, my phone buzzed. Another message from Uncle Michael. This time, it wasn't asking where I was. It simply read, "Don't believe everything Grandpa wrote." A second message followed immediately. "Meet me before you ruin this family." Richard quietly looked at the screen. "He knows you're talking to me." "How?" I asked. Richard frowned. "I don't know. But someone is keeping him informed." Thomas reached into his briefcase. "I have something else." He removed an old photograph. It showed Grandpa standing beside another man in front of the original workshop. I recognized Grandpa immediately. The other man had to be Daniel Brooks, Grandpa's forgotten partner. Thomas pointed toward Daniel. "My grandfather." I looked up in surprise. "Your grandfather?" Thomas nodded. "I'm Daniel Brooks's grandson." The room went completely silent. Richard slowly smiled. "So that's why you're here." Thomas nodded. "My grandfather spoke about Harold until the day he died. He always said, if anything ever happens to Carter Woodworks, find Harold's family before you trust anyone else." I stared at him. "So our families knew each other?" "For generations," Thomas answered. "But after my grandfather died, our families lost contact." Richard carefully opened the ledger again. He turned to the hidden founding agreement. Thomas looked at it for nearly a minute, then closed his eyes. "My grandfather's signature," he whispered. "I've never seen it outside family photographs." When he looked back up, his eyes were wet. "This is real." Richard folded his hands. "If this agreement is authentic, what does your company intend to do?" Thomas answered immediately. "The right thing." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means, if Carter Woodworks was sold without satisfying the founder's agreement, we'll cooperate with correcting it." I blinked. "You'd give the company back?" Thomas smiled slightly. "If we bought something under false authority, we don't truly own it." For the first time that day, I felt hope. Not because I wanted control of the company, but because someone was finally choosing integrity over profit. Just then, Richard's office phone rang. His receptionist sounded anxious. "Mr. Lawson, there's another visitor." Richard sighed. "Who is it?" She hesitated, then answered quietly. "It's Michael Carter. He says he isn't leaving until he gets Grandpa's ledger." Before Richard could respond, a loud voice echoed from the hallway. "I know she's in there." The office door burst open. My uncle stepped inside. His face was red, his breathing heavy. The moment he saw the ledger, his expression changed, not to anger, to fear, real fear. He took one slow step forward, then said something that made every person in the room freeze. "That ledger was supposed to be destroyed." No one answered, because in that single sentence, Michael had accidentally confirmed what Grandpa had suspected all along. He hadn't forgotten about ledger number 7. He had been looking for it, for years. The room went completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. My uncle stared at the old leather ledger as though it were a ghost. Then he realized what he had just admitted. His expression changed instantly. I didn't mean that." Richard calmly folded his hands. "You said the ledger was supposed to be destroyed." Michael swallowed. "I was referring to old accounting books. They're usually destroyed after several years." Thomas Bennett didn't even look convinced. "No," he said quietly. "That's not what you meant." Michael looked around the room. His eyes landed on me. "Can we talk privately?" I shook my head. "Anything you have to say, you can say here." His shoulders slumped. For the first time in my life, my confident uncle looked nervous. Richard opened a legal pad. "Let's begin with a simple question. When was the last time you saw ledger number 7? Michael answered too quickly. "I've never seen it." Richard gently slid the ledger across the desk. "You recognized it the moment you walked in." Michael didn't respond. Thomas stepped closer. "My grandfather helped start Carter Woodworks." Michael looked surprised. "Who are you?" "Thomas Bennett." Daniel Brooks' grandson. The color slowly disappeared from Michael's face. I thought your family moved overseas. Thomas nodded. We did. But we never forgot our grandfather. Richard carefully opened the hidden pages again. This founding agreement required approval from both founding families before any sale. Michael laughed nervously. That's impossible. I've run the company for years. Richard remained calm. Running a company and owning the right to sell it are two different things. Michael rubbed his forehead. You don't understand. No, I replied quietly. I think we're finally starting to. He walked toward the window. For nearly a minute, he said nothing. Then he finally turned around. When Dad got sick, the business was failing, Thomas interrupted. We've reviewed the financial statements. It wasn't failing. Michael frowned. You haven't seen everything. Richard nodded toward him. Then tell us. Michael closed his eyes. There was a recession. Several major customers canceled contracts. The bank refused to extend another line of credit. We almost missed payroll. I listened carefully. This was the first time he had ever spoken honestly about the company's struggles. I tried everything, he continued. I mortgaged my house. I refinanced company equipment. I even sold Grandpa's vacation cabin. I looked at him. You never told anyone. He smiled bitterly. Because Grandpa hated asking for help. So did I. Thomas quietly opened his laptop. I don't doubt the company struggled. But that's not why we're here. He displayed a financial chart. The business recovered. 3 years before Harold passed away. Michael didn't deny it. So why sell? Thomas asked. There was another long silence. Finally, Michael whispered, because someone made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Richard immediately asked, Northbridge? Michael shook his head. No. Another company. A competitor. They approached me first. They promised millions. But there was one condition. What? I asked. They wanted proof. That Grandpa's ownership restrictions were gone. The room became still. Richard spoke carefully. And were they? Michael slowly lowered his head. No. So what did you do? He didn't answer. Richard repeated the question. Michael looked directly at the floor. I started looking for ledger number 7. My heart pounded. For how long? Almost 8 years. You searched Grandpa's office? Yes. The workshop? Yes. The warehouse. The attic. The basement. I searched everywhere. His voice cracked. I never found it. Richard quietly asked, So why didn't you simply ask Harold? Michael laughed once, a tired, broken laugh. Because by then, he already knew I was looking. Richard slowly smiled. I suspected as much. Michael looked surprised. You knew? Richard nodded. Harold changed his will 2 months later. He also changed where he kept important documents. He told me, Michael isn't looking for memories anymore. He's looking for permission. I stared at my uncle. You spent 8 years searching for something Grandpa never wanted you to find. He nodded. I convinced myself, if I found it, I could finally fix everything. What needed fixing? I asked. He looked straight at me. The debt. Thomas frowned. What debt? Michael took a deep breath. The company never fully recovered. The bank loans, the equipment financing, the supplier guarantees. They all came due at once. I couldn't keep up. Richard looked confused. But the financial statements showed strong profits. Michael nodded. They were profitable. But almost every dollar went toward old obligations. I was running a successful company. That was slowly drowning. For the first time, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered Grandpa's words. Responsibility doesn't disappear just because life becomes difficult. Richard asked one final question. If that's true, why didn't you ask Emma for help? Michael stared at me, then quietly admitted, because if she learned the truth, she'd ask about the ownership agreement, and if she found the ledger, the sale would never happen. The room fell silent, not because of what he had done, but because he had finally admitted why. He hadn't hidden the ledger to save the business. He had hidden the truth to protect the sale. Just then, Thomas received an urgent email. He opened it, read it once, then a second time. His expression changed completely. Richard noticed immediately. What is it? Thomas slowly turned his laptop toward us. It's from our corporate legal department. Across the top of the message were 5 words. Urgent. Previous owner misrepresentation. Beneath it, one sentence stood out. Another claimant has just appeared. I frowned. Another claimant? Thomas nodded. A woman named... He stopped reading, looked directly at me, then whispered, Sarah Brooks. Richard's eyes widened. Daniel Brooks had a daughter. Thomas nodded slowly. And according to this email, she's still alive. Everyone in the room froze, because if Daniel's daughter was alive, then the second founding family hadn't disappeared after all. They had simply never been told that Grandpa's company had been sold. No one in Richard's office spoke. The email remained open on Thomas Bennett's laptop. Sarah Brooks. For over 30 years, everyone believed Daniel Brooks' family had disappeared. Now, one email had changed everything. Thomas looked at Richard. Our legal department found her through an old shareholder search. Richard frowned. Where is she? Thomas clicked another attachment. About 90 miles from here. She owns a small woodworking shop. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The Brooks family stayed in the woodworking business? Thomas smiled. My grandfather always said, wood is honest. If you respect it, it'll take care of you. I smiled. Grandpa used to say the exact same thing. Richard slowly closed Grandpa's ledger. I think Harold hoped this day would come. Michael looked exhausted. So what happens now? Richard answered honestly. Now. We ask Sarah what she knows. 3 hours later, we pulled into a quiet little town. At the end of a narrow street, a modest workshop stood beneath a faded wooden sign. Brooks Custom Furniture. The building wasn't large. The paint had faded. The roof had clearly been repaired more than once. But one thing caught my attention immediately. The smell. Fresh-cut oak. Exactly like Grandpa's old workshop. For a moment, I felt like I had traveled back 20 years. An older woman stepped outside carrying a toolbox. She paused when she saw Thomas. Then her eyes shifted toward Richard. Finally, she looked at me. Without saying a word, she whispered, You have Harold's eyes. A chill ran through me. You knew my grandfather? She smiled sadly. I knew him almost my entire life. Thomas stepped forward. Aunt Sarah. She hugged him tightly. I wasn't expecting company. Then she noticed the leather ledger under my arm. Her smile disappeared. Where? Did you find that? I answered quietly. Grandpa left it for me. She closed her eyes. I wondered if he ever would. Inside the workshop, everything felt familiar. Old hand planes, vintage chisels, half-finished rocking chairs. Even the radio looked almost identical to Grandpa's. Sarah noticed me staring. They built matching workshops. They believed partners should always work with the same tools. I smiled. They really were best friends. She nodded. They were more like brothers. Richard carefully placed ledger number 7 on the workbench. Sarah rested her hand on it. For several moments, she didn't speak. Then she quietly asked, "Did Harold leave the other letter?" Richard looked surprised. "What other letter?" "The one hidden beneath the founding agreement." We all looked at each other. "There wasn't another letter." Sarah smiled gently. "There was. You just haven't found it yet." She carefully turned to the last page of the ledger. Instead of reading it, she pressed gently on the inside of the leather binding. A soft click echoed through the workshop. The back cover separated slightly. Hidden inside was a paper-thin compartment. My heart started racing. Grandpa had built a secret compartment into the ledger itself. Sarah carefully removed a folded envelope. Across the front, Grandpa had written, "For Sarah and Emma, no one else. Only us." Sarah handed it to me. "You should read it." My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. If this letter has finally been opened, then Michael sold the company, and Sarah finally met my granddaughter. I looked at Sarah. She smiled through tears. "He knew." Richard nodded. "Harold usually did." The letter continued. "Emma, there is something no one ever told you. Carter Woodworks was never meant to belong to one family. Daniel and I built it together. Not for ourselves, but for every employee who trusted us." I paused, confused. "What does that mean?" Sarah pointed toward another paragraph. "Keep reading." "Years ago, Daniel and I signed a second agreement. One the lawyers never saw. If either family ever forgot why the company existed, the employees would become its future owners." I looked up. "The employees?" Sarah nodded. "We signed an employee stewardship agreement." Thomas whispered, "I've heard rumors, but I never believed it existed." Richard immediately asked, "Do you have a copy?" Sarah smiled. "I don't need one." She walked toward an old wooden cabinet, unlocked the bottom drawer, and removed a faded blue folder. Inside was the original agreement, signed by Harold Carter, Daniel Brooks, and witnessed by 2 employees who had worked at the factory since the very beginning. Richard carefully read every page, then looked up in complete disbelief. "This changes everything." I frowned. "How?" Richard slowly removed his glasses. "Because technically, Carter Woodworks wasn't intended to become private property. It was supposed to transition into an employee-owned company after Harold and Daniel were gone." Thomas leaned against the workbench. "So when Northbridge bought the company, we didn't just buy a business. We unknowingly bypassed the ownership rights of over 80 employees." The room fell silent. Those employees had spent decades building Grandpa's dream. Some had worked there longer than I had been alive, and according to Grandpa's own agreement, the company was supposed to become theirs. Not Michael's to sell, not mine to inherit, theirs to protect. Michael finally spoke. "I never knew." Sarah looked directly at him. "No, you never wanted to know. There is a difference." Michael lowered his head. For once, he didn't argue. Thomas slowly stood. "I have to call my board of directors." Richard nodded. "They're going to have difficult decisions to make." Thomas smiled. "No. I think they're about to have the opportunity to make the right one." Just as he reached for his phone, Sarah noticed something tucked inside Grandpa's letter. A tiny brass key. Attached to it, a weathered paper tag. Only 3 words were written. "Factory office desk." Sarah looked at Richard. "I remember that desk." Richard nodded slowly. "So do I." I frowned. "What is it?" Richard smiled. "If Harold left another key, he left another secret," Sarah quietly added. "And if I remember correctly, the factory office desk had a hidden drawer." The workshop fell silent again, because Grandpa hadn't finished telling his story, not even close. Somewhere inside the factory, one final secret was still waiting, and judging by the smile on Sarah's face, it wasn't money. It was something far more valuable. The brass key sat quietly in my palm. It looked ordinary. Worn edges, a faded number stamped into the metal. Nothing about it suggested it could change the future of an entire company. Yet Grandpa had hidden it inside his final letter. That meant it mattered. Early the next morning, Richard arranged for us to visit the factory. Although Northbridge Industries now owned the building, Thomas personally authorized access. "I want complete transparency," he told his management team. "If Harold left something behind, we're going to find it." Walking through the front doors felt surreal. The familiar scent of fresh-cut maple and oak filled the air. Machines hummed in the distance. Workers moved carefully between workstations. Many of them recognized me. Some smiled, others simply nodded. They remembered me from childhood. Grandpa used to bring me to the factory every Saturday. He believed every employee deserved to know the owner's family, and every owner should know every employee's name. An older craftsman slowly approached me. His name tag read, Frank Wilson. He smiled warmly. "You've grown up," I smiled back. "You remember me?" Frank laughed. "I remember the little girl who tried sanding a table upside down." Even Richard laughed. Grandpa had teased me about that story for years. Frank looked toward the old office. "We've kept Harold's desk exactly the way he left it. No one wanted to move it." Inside the office, time seemed frozen. Grandpa's leather chair still sat behind the desk. His favorite coffee mug remained beside the window. Family photographs lined the bookshelf. A framed sign hung above the desk. "Quality builds trust." It had always been Grandpa's motto. I carefully inserted the brass key into a small lock beneath the desk drawer. It fit perfectly. There was a soft click. Then, a narrow compartment slowly slid open. Inside were 3 items: a thick leather binder, a sealed envelope, and an old brass nameplate. The nameplate didn't read Harold Carter. Instead, it read, Harold Carter and Daniel Brooks. I stared at it. Grandpa had never removed Daniel's name. He had simply hidden it away. Richard opened the leather binder first. Across the cover, Grandpa had written, "Employee Stewardship Plan." Inside were detailed documents, meeting notes, financial projections, legal drafts, everything needed to convert Carter Woodworks into an employee-owned company. Grandpa hadn't simply dreamed about it. He had spent nearly 10 years planning it. Thomas quietly read through several pages. He looked genuinely amazed. "This is incredibly detailed." Richard nodded. Harold wasn't planning for retirement. He was planning for the next generation. Sarah turned another page. A list of names appeared. Every employee, every hire date, every percentage of future ownership. Some workers would receive larger shares because they had spent decades with the company. Others would receive smaller shares. But every full-time employee had been included. No exceptions. Grandpa believed everyone who helped build the business deserved a place in its future. Then Richard opened the sealed envelope. Written across the front were the words, "Read to the employees, not to the family, not to the lawyers, to the employees." Richard looked at Thomas. I think Harold knew exactly who this letter belonged to. That afternoon, word spread through the factory. Production stopped for the first time in years. More than 80 employees gathered in the main workshop. Some had worked there for 40 years. Others had only joined recently. Everyone stood quietly as Richard unfolded Grandpa's final message. To the Carter Woodworks family, if this letter is being read, then I am no longer standing beside you. For that, I am sorry. Several longtime employees lowered their heads. Some quietly wiped away tears. Harold hadn't been just their employer. He had attended weddings, visited hospitals, helped pay for medical treatments, celebrated retirements. He knew their children by name. To many of them, he had become family. Richard continued reading. People often say I built this company. That isn't true. I only built the first table. You built everything that came after. The workshop became completely silent. Even the machines seemed quieter. Some people believe ownership belongs to whoever signs the papers. I disagree. Ownership belongs to those who protect the people beside them. That has always been the true value of this business. Frank quietly removed his cap. Many others did the same. Richard reached the final page. If my family ever forgets why this company exists, I ask them to remember you. Because Carter Woodworks was never meant to create millionaires. It was meant to create honest work, honest lives, and honest pride. Please protect each other. That's the greatest inheritance I can leave. No one applauded. No one spoke. The room remained completely still. After several moments, Frank slowly raised his hand. I worked beside Harold for 46 years. He looked toward me. Your grandfather changed my life. When my wife became sick, he quietly paid our hospital bills. I didn't find out until after she recovered. Another employee stepped forward. He paid for my apprenticeship. A third added, he helped my daughter attend college. Then another, and another. Story after story filled the workshop. Most of us had never heard them before. Grandpa had never spoken about the people he helped. He simply helped them. Thomas looked around the room, then turned toward me. I understand now. This company wasn't successful because it made furniture. It was successful because Harold built trust. I smiled. That's exactly what Grandpa believed. Then Sarah noticed something tucked inside the back cover of the binder. A folded blueprint. She carefully opened it across Grandpa's old desk. It wasn't a building plan. It was a map of the factory. One room had been circled in red. The original workshop. The oldest part of the building. Next to the circle, Grandpa had written 4 simple words. One last lesson waits. Richard smiled. I should have known. What? I asked. He pointed toward the blueprint. Harold always saved the most important lesson. For the very end. Thomas looked at the circled room. The original workshop has been locked for years. Frank nodded. Harold never let anyone change it. Sarah quietly whispered, I think we're about to find out why. Everyone looked toward the old wooden door at the back of the factory. It had remained closed for more than a decade. Now, for the first time, we finally had the key. Every employee stood quietly. No one rushed toward the old workshop. For years, that door had remained closed. It wasn't because anyone was forbidden to enter. It was because everyone respected Harold Carter's final request. Leave it exactly as it is. Now, for the first time since Grandpa's passing, we were about to find out why. Frank walked beside me. I helped Harold lock this room. He smiled softly. He told me, one day Emma will understand. I swallowed hard. Even years later, Grandpa had been thinking about me. The brass key slid into the old lock. It resisted at first. Then, with a gentle turn, the mechanism clicked. The heavy wooden door slowly opened. The familiar scent of cedar, walnut, and pine drifted into the hallway. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows. Nothing had been touched. Grandpa's first workbench stood in the center of the room. Old chisels hung neatly on the wall. The original table saw rested in the corner. On the far wall, a faded photograph showed 2 young men smiling proudly beside their very first dining table. Harold Carter, Daniel Brooks. The beginning of everything. Sarah quietly walked toward the photograph. She reached out and gently touched her father's smiling face. He was only 27, she whispered, and Harold was 28. Thomas stood beside her. I've never seen this picture, Sarah smiled. Neither had I. I slowly approached Grandpa's workbench. There, resting on top, was a simple wooden box. No lock, no decoration, only 6 handwritten words, for whoever chooses integrity over money. Richard looked at me. I think Harold left this for you. I lifted the lid. Inside were 3 items: Grandpa's old measuring tape, a worn carpenter's pencil, and one final letter. I unfolded it carefully. Emma, if you've reached this room, you already know something important. People can steal money. They can steal buildings. They can even steal businesses. But they cannot steal character. I paused. The room was completely silent. When Daniel and I built our first table, we made only $12. We thought we were rich, not because of the money, because someone trusted 2 young craftsmen enough to buy something we built with our own hands. Several employees smiled through tears. They all understood exactly what Grandpa meant. Never measure success by what you own. Measure it by how many people sleep peacefully because you kept your promises. I looked around the room. Every employee was listening. Not like workers hearing a speech, like family hearing the final words of someone they loved. Richard turned the page. Grandpa's handwriting became slightly shakier. Michael. The room grew still. My uncle slowly looked up. If you're standing here, then I hope you've forgiven yourself. Michael's eyes widened. He hadn't expected Grandpa to address him directly. You always believed I was disappointed in you. I wasn't. I was worried. Because you started believing problems could be solved by hiding the truth. That path always costs more than honesty. Michael quietly lowered his head. Tears rolled down his face. For the first time, no one saw the businessman. They saw a son who had spent years carrying guilt he never admitted. The letter continued. If you've admitted what happened, don't spend the rest of your life trying to rewrite yesterday. Spend it rebuilding tomorrow. Michael whispered, I'm sorry. Not to defend himself, not to avoid consequences, just, I'm sorry. He looked at me. I should have trusted you. I should have trusted Dad. I should have trusted the people who built this company. I nodded. I know. It didn't erase what had happened, but it was the first honest conversation we had ever shared. Thomas stepped forward. I've spoken with our board. Everyone looked at him. They've reviewed the founding agreement, the hidden ledger, the employee stewardship plan, and Harold's final wishes. He smiled. Northbridge Industries has reached a unanimous decision. The room held its breath. We're rescinding the acquisition. A collective gasp echoed through the workshop. Thomas continued. The company will be transferred into the employee ownership trust Harold and Daniel originally designed. Frank covered his face with both hands. Several longtime employees began crying openly. After decades of loyal work, the company they helped build would finally belong to the people who had earned it. Thomas turned toward me. And Emma, our board has one request. What is it? We hope you'll serve as chair of the employee trust. I was stunned. I don't want to own the company. Thomas smiled. Exactly. That's why you're the right person. I looked around the room, at Frank, Sarah, Richard, the employees Grandpa had loved. Then I remembered something he told me when I was 12. A good leader doesn't stand above people. A good leader stands beside them. I smiled. I'll accept. But only if every major decision is made together. The room erupted in applause. Not for me, for Grandpa. Because his dream had survived. Months later, the sign outside the factory changed. It no longer read simply, Carter Woodworks, beneath the original name. A second line had been added. Founded by Harold Carter and Daniel Brooks, employee, owned since 2026. Sarah smiled the first time she saw it. Dad would have loved this. I think Grandpa would have too, I replied. Every Friday afternoon, the workshop closes 1 hour early. Not for meetings, not for paperwork, for something Grandpa called the builder's table. Employees gather together. They celebrate milestones, welcome new apprentices, solve problems, Share meals. No titles. No corner offices. Everyone has a seat. Because Grandpa believed the strongest businesses are built by people who listen to one another. One afternoon, while cleaning the original workshop, I noticed Grandpa's measuring tape lying exactly where I had left it. Tucked beneath it was a tiny folded note I hadn't seen before. I smiled. Grandpa always had one last surprise. It simply read, "Emma, if you're reading this, you finally understood. The business was never the inheritance. The people were." I folded the note carefully, placed it back inside the wooden box, and looked across the workshop. Grandpa had been right. Money had started the conflict. But it wasn't what healed the family. Truth did. Responsibility did. Forgiveness did. And every table built inside Carter Woodworks would carry those values long after all of us were gone. Whenever visitors ask who owns the company now, we don't point to an office. We point to the factory floor. Because that's where the real owners have always been. And every time I hear the sound of saws cutting fresh wood, I smile. Not because Grandpa left me a business, but because he left all of us a better way to build one.